Welcome to the deep dive. I want you to picture your own workplace for a second. Think about the dynamics, the private conversations, the Slack channels, the...
The late night emails.
Exactly. Have you ever wondered what actually happens when the line between just joking around with the team and pack your bags gets crossed?
It happens faster than you think.
It really does. It is a boundary we all navigate, but where precisely does the law draw that line? And more importantly, what happens when an employer decides you've crossed it, but they completely botch the exit process?
That is where things get incredibly messy.
Right. So we are unpacking a massive stack of source material today that gets right to the heart of this. We're looking at 30 years of data and operational notes from the Australian Workplace Discrimination Representatives, or AWDR.
They've seen it all.
Yeah, they are a non-lawyer workplace relations firm. They have handled over 16,000 unique, complicated workplace conflicts. And to really ground their insights, we're analyzing two wildly different real-life Fair Work Commission cases from 2024 to 2026.
What's fascinating here is that when you look at the Fair Work Commission rulings across these cases, you immediately see that workplace laws apply identically across the board.
Which sounds obvious, but in practice, it's really not.
Exactly. The jurisdictional thresholds and the requirements for procedural fairness do not shift. It truly does not matter if you are covered in coal dust working a 3 a.m. shift at a regional mine, or if you are wearing a tailored suit in a corporate boardroom in Melbourne.
The rules are the rules.
The foundational expectations of conduct and the rigid legal framework employers must follow to enforce them remain exactly the same.
And that universality is exactly what we're going to pressure test today. We're looking at the high-stakes reality of unfair dismissals, general protections, and, well, the sheer mechanical complexity of removing an employee.
It is rarely as simple as just saying you're fired.
No, not at all. The AWDR materials are particularly insightful here because they operate 24/7, 7 days a week. They are the ones answering the phone when an employee is in full crisis mode after a sudden termination.
Right. They handle the mediation, the negotiation, the arbitration.
And what their data shows is that a significant number of employees, and frankly a lot of employers too, fundamentally misunderstand the mechanics of the Fair Work Act.
Oh, absolutely.
They see toxic environments or workplace bullying or serious misconduct, and they assume the outcome is straightforward.
But it rarely is. The AWDR's case files demonstrate how quickly a seemingly straightforward termination can trigger a really complex jurisdictional battle.
Because there's a huge difference between being let go and an unfair dismissal, right?
Huge. When we talk about unfair dismissal, we mean being fired unjustly, without a valid reason, or, this is crucial, without proper process.
Okay.
And then there's constructive dismissal, which is when a toxic environment or management pressure essentially forces you to resign. You didn't want to quit, but you had no other choice.
So it's a forced exit.
Exactly. When an employer attempts to manage serious misconduct, they are bound by the standards set within employment contracts, explicit company policies, modern awards, and enterprise agreements.
It is a massive web of compliance.
It is. And if an employer skips steps in that framework, even if they possess undeniable evidence of egregious behavior, they leave themselves entirely exposed to a jurisdictional objection.
Which is exactly what the AWDR helps everyday Australians navigate. They frequently utilize these procedural failures during mediation, and they often do this on a no-win, no-fee basis to help workers find their voice and force settlements, because the Fair Work Commission, the FWC, places immense weight on the process itself.
Knowing the difference between a fair process and an unfair dismissal is your absolute best defense as an employee.
Okay, let's unpack this with our first case study. The FWC ruling came down in early 2026. This is Mr. Garth Saunders versus Jellenbaugh Mining PU Ltd.
A very intense case.
Very. Let's look at the operational environment first. It is April 2025. We're at the Bowen Basin Mine in central Queensland. It is the middle of the night, between midnight and 3:30 a.m., and Saunders is communicating over the company's two-way radio network.
Now, night shifts in remote locations obviously develop their own subcultures.
Right, they do. And employers in heavy industry are acutely aware of the vicarious liability risks associated with those subcultures. The informal banter on a closed radio network can easily bleed into hostile work environment claims.
Jellenbaugh Mining recognized this exact risk. They didn't just have a generic HR manual sitting in a drawer somewhere. They actively managed this specific communication channel.
They were proactive.
Very. Following a 2022 memorandum addressing offensive language, they rolled out highly targeted training in October 2024.
The Respect at Work slide deck.
Precisely. And the legal weight of that specific slide deck is the linchpin of the entire case.
Because it wasn't just vague corporate jargon.
No, the training explicitly neutralized the most common defense used in these situations. It stated, in writing, that just because someone does not object to unacceptable behavior at the time it occurs, it does not legally or culturally mean the behavior is welcome.
That is a huge distinction.
They mandated a strict zero-tolerance policy for discussions of a sexual nature. They documented it, they trained everyone on it, and they established a very clear behavioral baseline.
Which Saunders completely ignored. I mean, we are just looking at the documented formal complaint here, but the specifics really matter for understanding the FWC's ultimate ruling.
The details are quite shocking.
They are. During this late-night radio shift, Saunders asked if a coworker's partner would take MDMA to encourage them to engage in anal sex.
Over the company radio.
Over the company radio. He also suggested a coworker finger themselves in front of their sexual partner, and he allegedly stated that a worker should film their partner's reactions during intercourse, quote, so we can all enjoy it.
Yeah.
There was also a contested allegation about telling a coworker to train their sexual partner. Now, he denied that specific word, but he completely admitted to the core comments about MDMA and filming.
So the company initiates a standard show cause process in early May 2025. They do everything right. They present him with the allegations and the evidence, giving him the opportunity to respond.
Procedural fairness in action.
Exactly. Saunders accepts responsibility for the admitted comments. He expresses remorse, and he relies heavily on his unblemished 3-year record and the financial strain termination would put on his family.
Which is a tough spot, but management has to look at the policy.
Right. Management reviews his response, determines the conduct fundamentally breaches that zero-tolerance policy, and issues a termination notice. Right. But in a slight procedural pivot, Saunders' support person asks if he can resign instead of being formally fired.
To save his record.
Yes, and the company agrees.
And then Saunders immediately turns around and files an unfair dismissal claim representing himself.
He tries to argue it was a constructive dismissal because the termination letter was already on the table.
Yeah, but his defense regarding the actual conduct is where this gets completely bizarre. He argued the audio recordings misrepresented the timing, claiming there was a pause between the MDMA comment and the anal sex comment.
As if a pause makes it better.
Right. And he actually tried to claim that his remarks about MDMA were sourced from couples therapy podcasts he had been listening to about breaking down relationship barriers.
It is a highly creative attempt to recontextualize explicit workplace misconduct as psychological discourse.
That is a very polite way of putting it.
Well, unsurprisingly, the FWC dismantled that argument immediately. They analyzed the specific language he used and concluded it bore absolutely no resemblance to therapeutic advice. They categorized the comments as completely egregious in and of themselves.
But the core of his legal defense rested on condonation. He claimed that his supervisors were actively monitoring the radio channel. He pointed out that you can actually hear a supervisor laughing on the recording.
Which is a terrible look for the supervisor.
Awful look. But Saunders argued that if the direct supervisor is present, listening, and amused, then the behavior is culturally condoned by the company, rendering his termination profoundly unfair.
This is a classic misinterpretation of workplace law, and it is something the AWDR deals with constantly. Employees often believe that a manager's immediate reaction supersedes the written contract.
It feels logical, right? If my boss is laughing, I must not be in trouble.
It feels logical, but the FWC was incredibly firm on this point. They ruled that a supervisor's inaction, or even their laughter in the moment, does not invalidate a comprehensive corporate policy.
The written rule wins.
The company had invested in the Respect at Work training to prevent exactly this kind of vicarious liability. Even if the supervisor failed in their immediate duty to shut the conversation down, it did not mitigate the sheer egregiousness of Saunders' behavior.
So the company wasn't punished for the supervisor's bad reaction?
No. The FWC recognized the severe risk the conduct posed to the mining company and threw the claim out entirely. The process was sound, the policy was explicit, and the termination stood.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. We are shifting from a dusty radio room at 3 a.m. to an elite corporate boardroom.
A totally different world.
Entirely. This is the 2024 case of Adam Wright & Skilled versus Tabcorp Holdings Pate Ltd. Wright & Skilled is the CEO and managing director of this gambling giant. He has been there since 2000. He has an exemplary record and a base salary of $1.5 million.
And the stakes here make the Bowen Basin case look like a rounding error.
Seriously?
The financial and reputational implications in this case are massive. We are looking at a highly sophisticated executive operating at the absolute peak of corporate governance.
So in August 2023, Wright and Skilled is in a closed-door meeting with two male colleagues. According to an anonymous complaint that surfaced months later, he allegedly stated he would perform a sex act on a female official from the Victorian Gambling and Casino Control Commission.
A government regulator.
Yes, a regulator. And the context for this alleged comment was securing an extension to a 20-year wagering license in Victoria. We're talking about a regulatory asset valued at approximately $860 million.
The risk there is astronomical.
Tabcorp investigates, they substantiate the claim, and the board decides he has to go.
Which is a rational corporate response to a liability of that magnitude. But the board's execution of his removal completely ignored the fundamental principles of procedural fairness we just saw Jellenbaugh Mining successfully employ.
Let's look at the timeline because it reads like a hostile takeover in a movie. On March 13th, 2024, the board drafts two different ASX announcements, one saying he resigned, one saying he was fired.
Preparing for both outcomes.
Right. The next morning, March 14th, Wright and Skilled thinks he is heading into scheduled routine meetings in Melbourne. Instead, he is redirected to an unscheduled 11 a.m. meeting at the offices of Cordamentha. That's a business management consulting firm.
He's off-site.
Completely isolated, he tries to call the board chairman.
Ignored.
He tries to call the chief legal officer.
Also ignored.
Completely shut out.
Taking him to a neutral third-party location is a deliberate psychological tactic. It removes his home field advantage and completely isolates him from his internal support structures.
So he walks into that room blind.
When he walks into that room, the board subcommittee presents the allegation. He states he doesn't recall the comment and that it doesn't align with his usual vocabulary, but the board immediately shuts down any defense.
They didn't want to hear it.
Not at all. They inform him the investigation is already closed and the decision is final. They then issue an ultimatum. He has until 3 p.m. that afternoon to resign voluntarily, or they will terminate him publicly and immediately.
He begs for an extension until the next day just to consult his legal counsel. The board gives him one single hour.
Pushing it to 4 p.m.
Yeah. So at 3:28 p.m., cornered, he emails the chair saying, that being the case, I regrettably agree to resign. Now, he gets his 6-month notice payout of $750,000.
Which sounds like a lot.
But by resigning, he triggers forfeiture clauses that wipe out between $5 and $10 million in unvested shares, plus bonuses that could have pushed his annual earnings to $3 million.
A massive financial hit.
He is placed on gardening leave until his resignation takes effect in May.
Subsequently, Wright and Skilled files a Fair Work General Protections claim. Now, Tabcorp's defense leaned entirely on his status.
How so?
They argued he was a highly experienced, sophisticated businessman who made a calculated, voluntary decision to resign to protect his reputation. They pointed out his wife was a senior HR professional, implying he had access to immediate, sophisticated advice.
Ah, so they tried to say he knew exactly what he was doing.
Exactly. Therefore, according to Tabcorp, this wasn't a dismissal at all, it was mutual separation. They also filed a jurisdictional objection, claiming he submitted his paperwork weeks past the 21-day statutory limit.
But wait, I have to challenge this. We're talking about a CEO who allegedly made a highly sexualized comment regarding a government regulator to secure an $860 million public contract?
Yes.
Are you telling me the FWC looks at severe conduct that could threaten the company's entire regulatory standing and says, well, the paperwork was rushed, so he has a case? That feels completely detached from the reality of the misconduct.
It is a critical distinction to make. The FWC at this jurisdictional stage is not ruling on whether the alleged conduct occurred, or even if it justified termination.
They aren't looking at the actual incident yet.
No, they are ruling purely on the mechanics of the dismissal. The law does not allow an employer to bypass procedural fairness simply because the misconduct is severe or because the employee is highly paid.
Even for a CEO.
Even for a CEO. The FWC applied the concept of a Hobson's choice. That's a scenario where an employee is presented with alternatives that all inevitably lead to termination.
Right, because Tabcorp was deliberately withholding crucial information during that ambush.
Exactly. Wright and Skilled requested a copy of his employment contract and the investigation report during that meeting at Cordamentha.
Basic documents.
And the board refused to provide them. Furthermore, the board was strategically ambiguous about whether he would even receive his notice pay if he forced them to fire him.
Wow, so they held the $750,000 over his head, too.
By introducing that financial ambiguity and enforcing a rigid 4-hour deadline, They manufactured a scenario where resignation was his only viable option. The FWC heavily criticized this approach. They labeled it a carefully stage-managed process explicitly designed to force an exit.
So they threw out the mutual separation defense.
They determined it was not a voluntary resignation, but a clear dismissal initiated by the employer.
And what about Tabcorp's claim that he filed his paperwork late?
That was another critical procedural failure by the board. Because Tabcorp placed him on gardening leave, his employment technically and legally continued until May 14th of 2024.
Oh, because he was still on the payroll.
Yes. Therefore, his June filing was perfectly within the 21-day window.
So because the FWC threw out Tabcorp's jurisdictional objections, Wright and Skilled had the legal standing to pursue the matter in the federal court.
Yes, he did.
And that leverage is massive. It ultimately forced a confidential out-of-court settlement in September 2025. Tabcorp had to pay to make the problem go away, all because they bungled the exit strategy.
They bypassed the required process.
So what does this all mean? We have a minor on a radio at 3 a.m. and a CEO in a boardroom. Both made completely unacceptable comments. Both lost their jobs. But the legal outcomes are completely inverted.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the AWDR's entire operational thesis is validated by these two cases. The Fair Work Commission operates as a procedural equalizer.
It levels the playing field.
Completely. The mining company successfully defended an unfair dismissal claim regarding an employee with a clean record and a dependent family because they executed a flawless process.
They had the receipts.
They had an explicit written policy, they conducted targeted training, they initiated a formal show cause process, they provided the evidence, and they allowed the employee to respond before making a final determination. They respected the mechanics of the law.
While the Tabcorp board, dealing with a potential regulatory disaster, acted on pure instinct and corporate aggression.
They panicked.
They prioritized speed and public relations over legal compliance, and it blew up in their faces. They ambushed him, withheld his contract, isolated him, and weaponized his unvested shares against a ticking clock.
And that is the absolute core takeaway for anyone navigating workplace law. A severe allegation does not grant an employer immunity from procedural fairness.
You can't just skip to the end.
You cannot simply engineer an ambush to quietly remove a problem, regardless of whether that problem is a junior employee or the CEO of a publicly traded entity. If you manufacture a resignation under extreme duress, the FWC will pierce that illusion and treat it as a dismissal.
Which brings us to the real-world application for you listening right now. If you ever find yourself caught in the machinery of an HR investigation, or if you are managing someone out of a business, the process is the product.
The steps matter as much as the outcome.
Exactly. The documentation, the timelines, the opportunity to respond, those aren't just HR hurdles. They are the exact metrics the FWC will use to judge the legality of the action. Relying on it was just a joke, or my supervisor laughed, will not shield you from a well-documented zero-tolerance policy.
Not at all.
And conversely, a company cannot bully you into a 4-hour resignation window without leaving themselves open to massive legal liability.
The documentation is the only truth the Commission recognizes. It is why firms like the AWDR emphasize immediate representation. The moment an employer deviates from the enterprise agreement or the procedural requirements of the Fair Work Act, the balance of power shifts entirely, regardless of the underlying allegations.
It is a ruthless, highly technical environment. We've gone from analyzing the AWDR's mediation strategies for everyday workers to watching a sophisticated mining operation flawlessly execute a termination right up to a multi-billion-dollar board fumbling the exit of their own CEO through sheer procedural arrogance.
It highlights the friction between modern behavior and rigid law. And this raises an important question, something for you to carefully consider as you navigate your own professional environment.
What's that?
As workplace communication becomes increasingly informal, and as external media like the podcasts we consume or the digital subcultures we participate in continues to blur the line between personal entertainment and professional conduct, how will employment law adapt?
That's a great point.
When employees increasingly attempt to use shifting cultural norms to justify behavior, will the rigid traditional company policies hold up? Or will the FWC eventually have to redefine what constitutes reasonable workplace culture?
That is a phenomenal question to leave hanging. The culture of the outside world is constantly colliding with the employee handbook, and as we've seen today, the FWC is standing right at the point of impact.
It's an ongoing battle.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the complex mechanics of workplace law. Take these insights, look a little closer at your own company policies, and we will catch you on the next one.